Hi everybody, welcome back to What's On a Good Time. Today we're doing a very special haunted event at our hometown, Uptown Whittier, called the Haunted Ghost Tour. We want to share that with you. It's the tour with a tour guide that shows history of ghosts, right? Of stories.
In our hometown, in Uptown Whittier.
Right, so we want you guys to sit back, relax, and let's get spooky, guys.
Let's have a good time.
Let's have a good time, guys.
This is old church. It's been here since the 1920s. I've had a lot of people on my tours, especially some of the older people that went here over the years. It's kind of got a special place in a lot of people's hearts here in Whittier. As far as it being haunted goes, I got a great story from a woman who got married in this building back in the 1960s. And now you can decide whether this is good luck or not, but she told me she was there the day before the wedding and she's making sure everything's the way it should look, typical what brides will do. And suddenly she heard a door open. Now she knew she was in the building by herself and mom and dad had already left. She said, well, who's in here? And she turns around and she sees a man in the way she described it was old-fashioned preacher's clothing. And he literally just walked past her and like nothing, he just walked past her and disappeared into the next room. And she just was very shaken by that, and he didn't interact with her, he just saw her, or she saw him. And she immediately left, went home, told her parents what she'd experienced, and I don't know if it was good luck. She got married the next day, and she's still married to this day, so maybe seeing a ghost before your wedding is a good thing. But anyways, but why are we stopping here to talk about that? Because there's some people that believe that when a building is very important to people, that it's like there's a recording of their lives that stays behind. And I would imagine a church like this, the minister who spent all of his time here preaching, there's probably a part of him that has stayed behind to kind of watch over things. And that's kind of where my next story is going to go. Now, this is a place that you can visit right now, and many of you probably have. Where is this? It looks a little different now, but I bet you can figure it out. You guys are a quiet group tonight. Come on. Somebody here has been to this building. King Richard. Yeah, King Richard. Yeah, okay, you love it there. Okay, now you figured it out. Awesome. All right, I love King Richard's too. And when I started this ghost tour, I'd always gone to King Richard's since I was a kid. So I had a feeling that there were some ghost stories there. So I started talking to the employees. And a lot of them had some odd things happen to them over the years. And I did a little research, and sure enough, people have died in King Richard's. Back when it was an orange packing warehouse, back in the early 1900s, well up and through the 1940s, there was a man who had his head crushed. And the reason why was because the freight elevator, it was up and somebody wasn't paying attention and he was below it and accidentally pushed over some machinery and landed right on the top of his head. There was a woman who was electrocuted inside the building. She was one of the packers. And there was also a man in the 30s that was accidentally locked inside a freezer unit. Not a good way to go. So there is some tragedy inside that building. And people do experience it in some very interesting ways. Now, I received a phone call. It was a cold call, man from New York, said he grew up here in Whittier. He said, let me share with you what happened to me. Now, when he was a kid in the 60s, King Richard's had not opened yet. It was still an old, dilapidated orange packing warehouse. So him and his friends wanted to go ghost hunting. So they got their bikes, they got their little World War II surplus flashlights, and they were going to explore the old building. Now, those of us that are a little older, we used to do stuff like this, right? And what was the rule back then with mom and dad? Does anybody here remember? As soon as the lights come on, you had to be home for dinner, right? That was the rule. And so that's kind of what these kids were doing. And they were in the building, they were looking around with their flashlights, having a great time, and they were looking for ghosts. Suddenly they heard a very strange sound emanating from the basement. And they weren't scared. They were going to go check it out. So they slowly made their way downstairs. Now, those of you that have been to King Richard's know the basement isn't this deep, dark place. It's only a couple of steps down. But it is dark down there. They made their way into the basement, and it was full of crates and junk and whatnot. But they heard something in the back, something moving, some scratching. And so they got their lights out, and they shined it into the corner, and they see feet standing there. And at first they thought this is a mannequin. So they move the flashlight up a little bit, and now they see part of a dress, but now it quivers, it moves. And they started backing up a little bit, and then it rose. It was a woman wearing, the way he described it to me, was 20s era clothing. She rose up, and she had this purple haze around here. She moved forward, and the way he described it was these eyes, they were fluttering. He said very cold, dark eyes, and the jaw was moving back and forth, like kind of convulsing a little bit, and obviously they were just stuck there, frozen, seeing this woman, and clearly she's looking at them, they're looking at her, and it was a terrifying experience. But finally, they got the wherewithal, they broke away, they turned around, they ran away as quick as they could, of course never to return. But the way he told me the story was, he said, I'm now an older man, but I close my eyes at night to go to bed. I still see her all these years later. Now, I used to end the story right then and there. It is a good ghost story. But I had a nurse on my tour, and she said, no, your story doesn't end there. And I said, well, I think it does. She said, no. She's like, that spirit, that entity was not trying to scare those boys. I said, I think she kind of was. And she said, no, what did you tell us about people dying in that building? And I kind of thought about it for a second. She said, you said a woman was electrocuted there. And I said, absolutely. That's what the records say. Think about it. The purple haze, the mouth moving back and forth, the eyes fluttering. What happens when you're electrocuted? What do your muscles do? They contract. They were seeing a recreation of her death all these years later. That's what they were seeing. Now, generally speaking, when I tell my ghost stories, I like to have a couple of versions, so I kind of know that this isn't just somebody calling up and making up something. I want to hear some other versions. And with this particular story, I talked to somebody at King Richard's who told me about a cleaning lady who saw the exact same ghost. And very similar experience. The only difference was, what alerted her to the spirit was that there was a radio downstairs that was playing 1920s era music. When she got down to where the radio was playing, it was unplugged. Now her first thought was, although that's strange, maybe it's got batteries. And she made her way downstairs thinking that maybe somebody was down there, and she saw the exact same spirit. The only difference was she dropped all of her cleaning supplies, ran out of the building screaming. She called the person who hired her and said, I quit, and I left all of my things inside the King Richard's, and you will be bringing those to me because I will never, ever set foot in that building ever again. So there you are. Yeah, the parking's changed a little bit. This is the 1930s. That post office was built by the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. If you know your history, that was a Franklin Roosevelt during the Depression. And he was driving home from they were working on a play, and I think he got out around 1 in the morning. And he's driving back home to uptown, and he drives by Founders Park. And he noticed there's a lot of activity in the park. And so he slows down because he's kind of curious, and he sees a large horse-drawn hearse smack in the middle of the park. There is a coachman with a top hat, wearing a whip, sitting up top. There are 2 men in filthy overalls. They're trying to pull a coffin out the back of the hearse. Now, he knows, being a theater student, that Whittier is the site of many movies. So he thinks he's seen a movie production. He's a theater student. He's interested in this. So he slows down, but he notices there are no cameras, no director, no craft services, and he gets a chill down his spine. So he turns around and leaves. But then he's like, there's no way I saw that. So he heads back to the park at this point, and now the park is just empty. It's bathed in the moonlight, but there is certainly nothing there. So he drives home. He wakes up his roommate and says, you will not believe what I saw. And the roommate just smiles and says, you don't know Whittier history like I do. What is the other name for Founders Park that we use here in Whittier? Come on, you older residents. Dead Man's Park. Dead Man's Park. Why? Because it was a
cemetery.
It was a cemetery. Now, a lot of people on my tour that are old school Whittier residents, they'll very quickly tell you, oh yeah, that was the old cemetery. But a lot of them don't know the background, and that's the part I'm going to share with you guys right now. Way back in the 1890s, Whittier was dealing with a diphtheria outbreak, and people were dying very rapidly, and it was happening to a point where they needed space to bury bodies. And they didn't have the space. The issue was back then, we didn't have a cemetery. And so there were two things you could do. Either you could bury them in the back on your ranch, totally legal at the time, or if you had money, and you laugh, but it's true.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Or if you had money, you carted the body to Los Angeles and buried them in one of the cemeteries there. But I mentioned we're kind of a humble community, and people didn't have the money to do that. So there was a trick. The Dorlands, they had lots of land. They came forward and they said, look, we will turn our ranch into a cemetery, and we will become the undertakers. And that was perfect for them because they were involved in the lumber industry. And so why would that be good? They could make the coffins, couldn't they? This is a photo taken in 1913 of Founders Park.
Wow.
Guess I'll see it okay. So they continued to bury people there for many, many years. Is the back see okay? Initially, during the 1890s, they were using wooden gravestones, and eventually they started putting in the marble ones when people started having more money. And it operated as a cemetery for many, many years. The Dorlands themselves slowly started dying off. The last of the Dorlands was a woman by the name of Archulissa. And when I show you her photos, try not to laugh too hard because let's just say she's the stereotype of an undertaker. I cut her husband out of the photo because he just looked like a regular old cowboy. But she was special. Archulissa would continue to take care of the cemetery for many, many years. When she died, there was nobody left to maintain the graves. So what happened? Well, the grass started growing tall, then vandals came in and started pushing over the gravestones. It's a very sad picture. You can kind of see they're vandalized. So the city came forward and said, look, we can't do this anymore. We will remove anybody who has family members buried in Founders Park. We will remove them free of charge to Rose Hills. Would you like to know how many people came forward to take advantage of this free service offered by the city? Oh, there's Hedwig. He's a white owl. Only 6 people, between 6 and 8. I've heard a couple of different reports. So, well, there's
They're still in the show.
we believe it is well over 200. They have, when you go, it is a neat old building, and it is well known for those that have worked in it over the years. A lot of people share with me that they have had different, very spooky experiences inside. I actually talked to a security guard, and his job was basically to walk through with a flashlight every couple of weeks, and he told me that when the way he would do it was he'd have his flashlight up like this so he could see where he was going, and he would have one hand behind him. And he doesn't do that anymore because one day he felt cold fingers interlocking with his hand on his back. He said he immediately moved it, and he's like, whatever is in there must be lonely because it's trying to hold hands with it. Lights will turn on and off by themselves. We have had it on my tour before. People that stand on the porch often will hear very soulful 1930s and 40s era music. I don't advise you doing it because they put an alarm on there. So, but before they did that, a lot of people would go over there and just hear those noises and whatnot. I had one gentleman I interviewed that I guess he was waiting for a ride to pick him up, and he was standing by the back door and he could see people inside moving around, and he moved because he's like, he knew the building was vacant, and it was definitely, he could see people moving around. The president of the Lions Club was on my tour a while ago, and he was let inside because they wanted to purchase the building. And he said the whole time he was there, he felt somebody walking with him. He could hear the footsteps. It was very clear that he was not alone. And so they ended up not buying the building. But here's my favorite story. This woman worked in the building when it was still the Red Cross, and she was the only one. Everybody had gone home for the day. And suddenly she heard music emanating from the banquet room. And she thought maybe there was something going on that she didn't know about, so she wanted to go look. And she said it was sad music. And she made her way to where the banquet room is, and she said there was a little bit of light coming from underneath the door. She opened it up, and suddenly in the middle of the room, she sees a man. He is wearing a World War II era uniform. He is dancing with a very beautiful woman. They appeared to be in love, looking in one another's eyes. She said she was almost embarrassed, as if she was intruding on them. But she said it was definitely a spirit, two of them. And as she watched them, they continued to dance, and then they faded from her view as if they had never, ever been there. Now, who are they? Well, I don't really know, but I will tell you what I do know. Go over to City Hall. We have a memorial over there. We have the names of many, many men who died overseas for our country. We had Whittier residents that died on the beaches of Normandy. We lost them in Italy, Iwo Jima. Any of the big battles of World War II, we did lose men. And what I think is, they had dances there. They had big ones. And this would have been the time, this would have been the place where men would have said goodbye to their sweethearts before they shipped overseas. So my theory is this is a soldier who did not return. And in death, that is where he is with his sweetheart, dancing and having their last dance together. So I will let you decide whether that is romantic or terrifying. We're very open to that sort of thing. So when the tour was over, they said, you know, we had a good time, but we didn't really, feel anything. And I said, look, that's great. Why don't you go to Founders Park? Let me know how it goes. And so I gave them directions, and I went one way and they went the other, and that was the end of it. And this was a Saturday night, and I just went home, went to bed. My phone rings at 7 a.m. And I looked at it, it was a local number, and I was thinking, oh great, one of the residents is upset. Somebody had bugged them or something like that. And so I definitely don't want that. And it was actually the husband. And he said, we have a big problem. We thought maybe you could help. And I said, well, I don't know that I can, but I'll listen to what you have to say. And so they did go over to Founders Park, exactly as I had instructed. They got their cameras out, and they started filming. And sure enough, after just a couple of minutes, they got the little orbs moving around. That was kind of fun. They thought that was neat. Then they saw what appeared to be little shadows. They're people, like children maybe, walking around. One of them looked like it was crawling. And they thought that was neat. Then they heard giggling. And it was very distinctly a little girl's giggle. And this is when the wife said something very foolish. That's a little girl. I'd sure love to have a daughter. Yeah, don't do that. As soon as she said it, everything stopped. Completely quiet. Show was over. Put the phones back in their pockets. They left, not thinking anything else other than that was an interesting experience. And everything was quiet when they went to bed until around 2 in the morning. Why do these things always happen at 2 in the morning? I wish I could tell you it was a dark and stormy night, but I don't know about that part. It was 2 in the morning. And they heard giggling from their hallway on the other side of their closed door. And the voice, it was moving toward their door. The door slowly opened, and then they heard a little voice say, do you want to come and play with me? The door opened on its own. Now keep in mind, the lights are off. But whatever it was darker than the darkness of their bedroom. It slowly moved in and sat on their bed. They literally saw the bed depress. Ghost bud. And it moved, you got that one, and it moved over as if it was turning to look at them. And at that point, he jumped up out of bed, he flipped on all the lights, and as soon as he did, that depression, it slowly rose as if it had never been there. Now, they turned on every single light in the house. They turned on the TV, and they sat there all night until they called me. Why? Because this was what they were hoping. Sir, do you think she's going to go back? I said, I don't know. You kind of invited her. Now, I've not heard back from them, so I don't know if they're dead. But at any rate, here is, this is a special home. This is the Barclay Charles place. It is one of, not our oldest, but is one of our older homes here in Whittier. Barclay Charles owned all of this land here. In fact, the park was his. He sold it. He sold the land to the city so they could put this park here. Now, who's Barclay Charles? Well, this is the fun part for me. I actually know something the city got wrong on their website. Barclay Charles is listed on the website as being a Civil War veteran. And that is only true in that he enlisted in the 7th Iowa Cavalry as their bugler during the Civil War. He never once went into battle against the rebels. His troop was sent to fight the Indians. So he was sent west, and he fought the Cheyenne and the Sioux. He was in a number of very large battles. When he got out of the service, he got on a train, made his way to California, and there was opportunity here. And this land was available for sale, and it was being sold from a guy. Oh, sorry about that. It's the little seed pods falling down. They're not ghosts, I promise. He purchased this land from a guy by the name of Pio Pico. Does anybody know who that is? And he is what? The last governor of Alta California under Mexican rule. And he owned most of this land. He had very large holdings in what is today Whittier, and he had some financial problems, and he had to sell some of his land to Barclay Charles. So he built that lovely house. He had his orange grove here, and his wife Sarah, she used to stand up at those windows, and she would look out over her orange grove. And she died in the 1930s, and Barclay at that point left. He went to move in with some family, and the home was basically, he willed it to his daughter and son-in-law, and they lived there for many, many years. But Sarah has stayed behind. She generally walks across those windows. People will see a woman in white, sometimes standing there looking out over the park like she used to in life. She just is kind of stuck around. The people that live in the home right now have told me that sometimes they catch her out of the corner of their eyes, or they'll hear her walking around. When I first started this tour, the house was vacant, and I had a woman come on with me. We kind of were walking the neighborhood looking for haunted houses, and she could see dead people. I can't. She could. And she stood there, and she didn't know. We didn't know any of the history of the house at all. And she looked up. She's like, "There is a woman standing there watching us right now." And so when I later found about how Sarah died in that room, it kind of made sense. Now here's a newer story that if you've been on the tour before, you wouldn't have heard this one. I talked to the guy that lived next door, and after one of my tours, he pulled me aside, and he's like, I got to tell you my experience. He's like, I don't know why I didn't tell you this one before. When he moved in, he'd settled his kids down, and a couple of the kids came down very frightened after he tucked them into bed. They said, "We don't like that mean lady standing in the other house looking at us." And so he went upstairs, and he's like, "There's no mean lady there." But the kids were sure that they had seen this mean lady peering out of the darkened window next door. And this would go on and off for a number of weeks. And he didn't really have an explanation for the kids, but they were very fervent that they were seeing something. And one day they were out of town, and he happened to be upstairs, perhaps cleaning up toys, and he just kind of looks over, and there she was in that darkened window, standing there, giving him this kind of menacing glare. And he said he just kind of stepped back, very frightened. The kids are right. So he wandered downstairs as quick as he could, kind of breathing hard, and realized that he would have to find a solution to this problem next door. And would you like to know the solution he came up with? Curtains! Curtains! Right! Curtains!